Chapter 6 Mazen. A djinn! Mazen threw open the door of his brother's room. There's a djinn in the city! Save for a single lantern, there was no light in Hakim's room. Mazen paused in the doorway. After the incident with the djinn, he was not eager to step into a dark room. But this was not the abandoned place of worship. This was Hakim's room. A cozy, if somewhat claustrophobic prison, filled with towering stacks of tomes and maps. They surrounded even Hakim's bed, making it impossible to spot from the doorway. Hakim? He looked beseechingly at his brother's back. Hakim remained hunched over the scrolls and map-making instruments on his desk. What's this about a djinn? Is this from one of your stories, Mazen? If only. No, I'm talking about a real djinn, Hakim. Hakim continued working on whatever he was working on. Mazen blinked. Maybe I was not clear? He drew closer until he could see what his brother was drawing, an intricate map of the desert that featured cities and oases so detailed they seemed to breathe off the parchment. It was stunningly beautiful, and for a few moments Mazen let himself get lost in the landscapes he'd only ever visited in stories, the places he'd dreamed of traveling to since he was a child. He watched his brother work, and he forgot why he'd come. And then, abruptly, he remembered. Hakim, the djinn was real. It ensnared me with its magic. It was a woman, you see, and she put me under some kind of spell with her beauty. That's nice, Mazen. She took me into an abandoned building and nearly suffocated me to death. I must say, this story lacks the suspense of your usual tales. It's not a story. Mazen gripped his brother's shoulder. This is the truth, Hakim. Hakim carefully set down his paintbrush and looked up. In this lighting, he could have passed as the Sultan's son, even with his hazel eyes. You seem in one piece to me, he said. Thanks to a random passerby. Hakim regarded him quietly for a few moments, brows scrunched. Then, slowly, he laid his hand over Mazen's. Peace, Mazen, I believe you. His eyes flitted to the hourglass on his desk. We must meet with the Sultan's guest soon, but we have time for you to tell me more of the story. Mazen was more than happy to oblige. After he had finished, Hakim eyed Mazen's hands and said, You aren't wearing the rings. Mazen glanced down at his bare fingers. Why would I walk around in disguise with royal rings? The guards would come running if I so much as raised my hand. Hakim sighed, melodramatic as always. He raised his own hand, revealing 5 elaborately designed iron rings, identical to the ones the Sultan had gifted Mazen. We have these rings for a reason. Wear gloves if you must, but don't put yourself in danger for the sake of making a disguise more convincing. Mazen had nothing to say to that. Hakim was right. A disguise was not armor if it had such exploitable weaknesses. I'm glad you are safe. Hakim leaned forward in his chair. I know you do not wish to tell Omar about this, but have you considered? Omar knows. Hakim pinched the bridge of his nose. Ah. He caught me sneaking out and said he would keep it a secret so long as I did him a favor. Mazen could only pray Omar honored their deal. Hakim looked like he was on the verge of scolding Mazen when he paused, glancing at the depleted sand in the hourglass. He stood. We must go meet with the Sultan. He eyed Mazen's baggy attire. You might want to change into something more appropriate. Go, quickly. I will tell the Sultan you were helping me with the map. Mazen sighed with relief. Bless you, Hakim. Hakim simply smiled as he waved him outside. Yalla, you don't have all night. Knowing that his father did indeed despise tardiness, Mazen hurried to his rooms to prepare. The servant inside said nothing upon his return. They never did when he paid them to keep his secrets, and left the chamber without comment when he dismissed them. Without them the space felt enormous. Mazen had spent years trying to fill it, but with little avail. Because he was, on occasion, obligated to entertain esteemed guests here, his father had forced him to dispose of anything too personal. So Mazen kept his most treasured possessions out of sight. The 2 mother-of-pearl chests on either side of his canopied bed contained city maps Hakim had drawn for him over the years, and he had stored his commemorative coins he'd stolen from the treasury in an extravagant wooden cupboard by the window. The only sentimental collection he had on display was the dozens of miniature clay creatures he and his mother had purchased in the souk when he was a child. The collection was showcased in the alcove where he entertained his guests on the shelves surrounding the perimeter. And then there was the blue and white carpet beneath his feet, the one that was nearly identical to the rug in the souk. He told the weaver it was a gift, when in truth he had taken it from his mother's rooms, knowing it was one of her favorite possessions. He could still remember the way her eyes had lit up when the Sultan gave it to her. Before she'd married him, she had been a wanderer. No doubt the carpet had reminded her of her own tribe and travels. Mazen had never met the family on his mother's side, and never even seen another city outside Medine, but he was plagued by the same wanderlust. He sighed as he threw off his nondescript robe and donned a rich red tunic and surall trousers. He pinned his mother's red gold scarf, the only heirloom he possessed from her tribe, around his neck and slipped his 10 rings onto his fingers. Last came the 3 royal earrings, a small crescent, a star, and a sun. Once he was prepared, he left his room and hurried through the open-air corridors until he came to the Diwan, which was marked by gargantuan doors painted with extravagant depictions of Medine's city life. Market-goers bartering with merchants, pearl divers riding sambuks across the waves, soldiers striding through fields made green by gin blood. The images vanished from view as guards opened the doors. The Sultan's Diwan was intimidating in its grandiosity. The walls sparkled with a mosaic of images that featured Medine's first sultan slaying jinn and befriending fantastical creatures. Elaborately painted lanterns hung above the ark, illuminating the rest of the interior. The spacious mezzanines, the impressive half-stage, and in the heart of the room, the dining area. Only 4 people sat at the low-rising table, though Asha had been served for at least 6. At the head of the table, dressed in the finest cloaks and jewels, was the Sultan. Today he wore an expensive silk shawl around his head with a band of gold wrapped around his forehead like a circlet. His hair was a smoky gray beneath the fabric. Sitting to his right was Omar, whose definition of dressing down was to remove some of the knives of his person. On the Sultan's left was his guest, a middle-aged man dressed in vibrant green. He looked vaguely familiar, though Mazen could not remember where he had seen him. Hakim sat at the guest's left, clutching a scroll. His discomfort was clear in the tenseness of his shoulders. He looked less at home than the stranger. But then, Hakim had always been an outsider, a prince in title but not in blood. He was a living reminder of the infidelity of the Sultan's second wife, a fact he was made aware of constantly. Mazen forced the gloomy thought away as he sat and greeted the guest. "Mazen," his father said as he made himself comfortable, "this is Rasul al-Jashin, one of the merchants I do business with. You recognize him?" Mazen smiled. "Ya, Saeed. You must forgive me. Your appearance is familiar in the way a dream is. Has something about you changed?" The merchant grinned. "Only in the face, Saidi." The memory clicked. The single eye, the beautiful robes, the mouth filled with colorful teeth. Yes, Mazen knew this man. He received generous compensation from the Sultan for presenting his rare trinkets to him first. "You have—" Mazen tapped his right eye. The merchant laughed. "Yes, I am one-eyed no longer. A miracle, wouldn't you say?" The Sultan cleared his throat. "You were about to tell us of this miracle when my son arrived, Rasul." "Ah, yes. Allow me to enlighten you, my Sultan." And so he told them of the elixir delivered to him by the elusive midnight merchant. Mazen was fascinated. He'd heard tales of the merchant and her adventures, but had never gotten an account from someone who'd met her. He couldn't help but be envious. "I know the look in your eyes, Saidi," Rasul grinned at the Sultan. "You want to find this midnight merchant, don't you? I hope you do not plan on throwing her into the bowels." Mazen shuddered. The bowels, aptly named because they were prisons erected in holes that ran deep beneath the city, were inescapable. Anyone foolish enough to land themselves inside never saw the sun again. "While she is engaged in many illegal dealings, no, I have a more useful purpose for her." The Sultan gestured to Hakim, who unrolled his scroll, revealing his map of the desert. Rasul stared at it intensely, as if assessing its monetary value. The Sultan seemed unimpressed. He never complimented Hakim on his skills. He simply expected him to employ them on demand. The Sultan ran his finger over the carefully drawn oases, part of the cities of Daim and Gibon, and to an ocean of sparkling sand labeled Western Sand Sea. Mazen's eyes widened when he saw the word printed in the center of the Sand Sea, Dahab, the lost Jinn city of legend. If the Midnight Merchant is so adept at tracking and collecting magic, then perhaps she can find what others cannot, a priceless relic from the city of Dahab. Mazen paled. He knew the relic his father spoke of. The Sultan had already sent dozens of men to find it. All had failed. No one ventured into the Sand Sea and survived. He would be sending the merchant to her death. He wanted to object, but to question the Sultan would undermine his authority, so Mazen struggled quietly with his distress. The room was tense after the Sultan's proclamation, their meal eaten in near silence. Mazen was relieved when his father dismissed them early, saying he wanted to speak to Rasul alone. Outside the Diwan, Hakim followed his guard escorts back to his room while Omar veered in the direction of the courtyard. Mazen trailed him. And yet, despite his resolve to apprehend his brother, he still somehow lost him. When Mazen turned the bend into the rose garden, Omar had vanished. Mazen was baffled, but nonetheless determined. He rushed down the pathways between the flowers, following them through an orchard filled with various fruit-bearing trees until he reached the sparring pavilion, a large wooden platform surrounded on all sides by tree-shaped columns. At first he saw nothing, but then he backtracked and realized there were people standing by the platform, a cloaked woman, and in front of her, Omar. Mazen mentally chided himself for his nearsightedness as he approached. The two were in the middle of a conversation when Omar abruptly turned toward him, lips curved. "Why, if it isn't my adventurous little brother." It was an effort to return Omar's smile. "Salam, Omar. Who's your friend?" He glanced at his brother's female companion, whose face was hidden beneath her hood. Mazen could make out dark brown eyes, fierce eyebrows, and an aquiline nose. "This is Aisha bint Duas," Omar said. "She is one of my best thieves." Mazen blanched. This woman, a hunter? One of Omar's 40 thieves? Mazen had seen the thieves in passing, but never spoken to them. In fact, he tried to avoid them at all costs. Most of the time this was easily accomplished. The thieves did not participate in court life, they were simply here to report to Omar. Mazen had definitely never seen this woman before. He would have remembered her piercing stare. He put a hand on his chest and bowed. "It is a pleasure." Aisha raised a brow. "Is it?" Mazen blinked, at a loss for how to respond. Omar just laughed. "Aisha is also my most honest thief. She can cut a man down with her words just as easily as with her knives." He waved a hand. "You are dismissed, Aisha." Aisha bobbed her head and walked off. When she was gone, Omar leaned against the pavilion column and smirked. "Do not take offense, Mazen. Aisha dislikes most men. But you?" Omar shrugged. "It hardly matters whether she likes me. She is an excellent hunter and obeys my orders without hesitation. That is all that matters. But—" He cocked a brow. "You are not here to speak about Aisha. What do you want?" Mazen took a deep, stilted breath. "I want to know why you returned early today. Has your memory failed you? I told you. I found all my marks." "I have no reason to remain in the desert after my job is done," he grinned. "I am sure you had a much more interesting day than I. You told me you were going to the souk to find a storyteller, but that is not the whole truth, is it? There was a woman." Mazen stared at him. "What?" "You must have left quite the impression for her to stalk you through the streets." Mazen was beginning to feel faint. "What are you talking about?" "A woman followed you into the noble quarter. I thought you'd broken her heart the way she was chasing you." "Layla. Or the Shadow Jinn?" Mazen shook off his fear before it grew roots. He focused on Omar's words, what they implied. "You were following me," he said, "because you were tracking a jinn, weren't you?" Omar didn't even bat an eyelash. "A valiant pastime, yes?" Mazen could hear the thud of his heartbeat in his ears. "You knew there was a jinn in this city when I left the palace. You could have told me it was out for your blood. For our blood." Omar shrugged. "I may have forgotten to mention it." Mazen's fear burned away, replaced with an anger that shot through his veins like ice. He moved without thinking, grabbing the collar of his brother's tunic and shoving him into the column. "This is no laughing matter, you ass! I could have died!" His hands quivered as he looked into his brother's eyes. Even now they sparkled with amusement. Mazen wanted to punch him. "On the contrary, I find it quite entertaining." Omar set his hand atop Mazen's. Mazen flinched at the coldness of his fingers. "Seeing you angry is always a good time, Aki. But as always, you are concerned about the wrong things. Let me worry about the jinn. You should worry about father finding out what happened. Imagine what he would do if he realized that you had not only left the palace, but were attacked in doing so." Omar pried Mazen's fingers from his tunic. "You think he would give you a second chance? No, he will do to you what he has done to Hakim. He will make you a prisoner in this place. There would be no escape, not even with guards." Mazen stepped away. Omar's gaze had become thoughtful, as if he could read all the insecurities in Mazen's heart. "Remember, Aki, which of us has the upper hand." Omar smiled pleasantly, tucked his hand into his pockets, and walked away. Mazen watched him go, mute. No argument could save him from this predicament. It would not matter if he proved Omar's incompetence as a hunter to his father. Ultimately, Omar would be scolded and Mazen would be trapped. It was a long time before he swallowed his dread and returned to his room.